Welcome to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things West Indies cricket. By the fans, for the fans.
And I listen to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast.
Indeed you are, people. You listen to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. I've got ice cream in my mouth. Welcome to a live show of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. I'm one half of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, Machel St. Patrick here. And with me as ever, Santokie and Machel, the other half of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. Santokie, how you doing?
Yeah, all good, Mash. Hope you're enjoying your ice cream, Mash. But we're here. You know, it's been a monumental week, I think, fair to say, for West Indies cricket in terms of both short-term where our cricket's going and long-term where our cricket's going. We were both expecting, we'd been told by the Cricket West Indies president, Dr. Kimo Paul, that the coach would be announced, the new head coaches for white ball and red ball cricket would be announced on Friday. So we were kind of prepared for that. But even before that, 24 hours before, the all-important World Cup qualifying 15-man squad was announced. So we're here to look at both of those sort of massive announcements that have happened in the last 48 hours, Mash. So without, where do you want to start, Mash? Should we go with the coaches?
Yeah. And first things first, actually, Dane. I don't know if that is a super chat or not, you know, because I haven't even got YouTube open to see it. But thank you very much. If that is a super chat and you've donated $5 to Caribbean Cricket Podcast, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Anybody else who wants to do likewise, go ahead, be our guest. Thank you for everyone who's tuned in, etc. Press the like button, press the subscribe button, press the notification button, tell all your friends, all of that jazz. But as you said, Santokie, and thank you, Dame. As you said, kind of monumental week in West Indies cricket. We've had our two head coaches announced. And actually, before I kind of give you my synopsis of everything, I actually want to bring it back to you, though, because you were in the press conference and not. I think sometimes what happens in West Indies cricket is people see the kind of official press releases that Cricket West Indies will put out. And unless you have the privilege of going to one of the actual press conferences, you don't really catch the magnitude of everything and the kind of nuances of everything that's kind of said. That the press releases only barely touch the surface of the main talking points. So I guess for the benefit of the viewers for this particular live and those who go on to listen to it as well, what were the main takeaways from the press conference itself?
Well, yeah, as you said, Mash, I think because in recent weeks or months, you know, Cricket West Indies, especially the selectors and, you know, even the stakeholders, there hasn't been that many press conferences. So I think this was an opportunity for, you know, journalists in the regions to ask a lot of questions which had been brewing. So, you know, we had topics about Shirley Clarke being fired from the Windward Islands coaching setup. We had questions about the women's team. So it was kind of a combination of loads of questions. But in terms of going back to the point about the head coaches, which was the focal point of the press conferences, I guess it was an interesting one. It was essentially with Daren Sammy. First, I mean, to confirm, Daren Sammy is the white ball coach and Andre Coley is the red ball coach. For those of you who are joining who may have missed that news flash, so those are the two coaches. The press conference was hosted by Dr. Kimo Paul, had Jimmy Adams, Director of Cricket, Johnny Graves, CEO, all in there with various media representatives from the different islands. The interesting thing for me, I guess, with Sammy was, we're talking about Sammy, the first thing which was brought up was he doesn't have his level 3 coaching certificate. But Kimo Paul explained, obviously, they were looking for him to get that essentially at some point. And the other thing was, Johnny Grave also said Shimron Hetmyer was essentially the runner-up for the white ball coach position. So it's interesting. That was for me that one of the big talking points, because they've essentially, Mash, I don't know what you have to say about this. They've essentially overlooked in terms of, because Shimron Hetmyer has got the coaching level 3 coaching badge. So in terms of technical credentials, Mash, they've essentially gone for Daren Sammy. Do you think this is they're essentially saying we need someone whose strongest suit is management and motivation, who can galvanise the players in a more maybe charismatic way than a Shimron Hetmyer. Because if you're comparing it on paper, it'd be interesting to know. It wasn't given away in the press conference, obviously, because it's confidential how what went on in the interviews. But on paper, Shimron Hetmyer is more qualified. So from your perspective, looking at the initial appointment of Darren Sammy, do you think they've gone for him? They've gone for the man, Darren Sammy, the motivator, the captain, the leader, rather than, the coaching who can have that technical expertise?
Yeah, excellent question. What I'm about to say next is not intended to denigrate Darren Sammy. I hope Darren Sammy goes on to be an excellent head coach for the West Indies white ball side. I hope he's able to let's not even say motivate, although we'll come to that argument in a second. I hope he's able to lead the white ball sides both in ODI and T20 cricket to new heights. And when I say new heights, basically our kind of status at the moment is right at the bottom. So anything above that is some level of improvement, right? But I think we've got to be quite honest about this. If one of the kind of critiques in West Indies cricket is that not enough West Indian coaches have the necessary qualifications and credentials to help develop West Indies cricket, right? And for those people who are obviously watching and listening, think of it in the same way as taking like your football badge qualifications, right? So you kind of have your A license, right? And you work your way up and you take your relevant badges and so on and so forth. If we are saying that one of the kind of key downfalls of West Indies cricket is from the grassroots up, we don't have enough fully trained to the highest level coaches in the region. Donovan Miller, who may or may not have been considered, is level 4, right? He currently works in the UK or has worked quite extensively in the UK. There's not many West Indian born coaches or West Indian coaches who have level 4, much less do they even have level 3. I think there's an argument to say it sends the wrong message if you give the coaching job to Darren Sammy, who's only got level 2. If he's got that, he's only got level 2, which therefore begs the question for me. I think Darren Sammy I think it was a hype pick, right? But hear me out on this. Again, I'm not trying to criticize Darren Sammy. I think this was the same as like picking Frank Lampard to manage Chelsea. It's the same as picking Ole Gunnar Solskjaer to manage Manchester United, right? In so much as you have former greats of a particular institution, club, whatever, and essentially Santokie, you're hoping they can bring back a good feeling to the brand. Yeah? You're hoping that they can bring some kind of sense of good time just through their status as to who they are, and that they have some kind of almost magic potion that allows them to galvanize the troops because of their status and connection to the brand, right? So Darren Sammy, he doesn't need any kind of elevation. 2-time World Cup winning captain, T20 side. Who can criticize that? Do you get what I'm saying? From the jump, who can criticize that? And to be fair, I think by appointing Sammy, it buys Cricket West Indies a feel-good factor. Yeah. Who in their right mind would turn around and go, how dare you appoint Darren Sammy as white ball head coach? Anybody who's a 2-time winning captain is going to get more leeway than anybody than others, if you see what I mean, coaching credentials or not. But at the same time, we have to look at those lack of coaching credentials and say, well, hold on a minute, was this the right decision in so much as actual qualifications?
Yeah,
that's how I weigh it up. And just very quickly to finish, Shiv, if the rumors that I've heard coming out of Jamaica are correct, I wonder how much of what went on at the Talawars, and for example, Rovman Powell has left the Talawars. Shiv was the winning coach of the Talawars. I just wonder how much of that rumor, conjecture, whatever it might be, if Shiv had got the job, he's got to deal with Rovman again, right? What type of beef is currently existing between Rovman and Shiv? Of course, they would be professional and so on and so forth. But I just wondered, did that play a role as well? I don't know. I'm just going to put it out there.
Yeah, well, excellent analysis as always, Mash. I think firstly, to address the Shiv point, obviously the rumours coming out of Jamaica, he might have had issues with Rovman Powell. if that was a deciding factor, we never know if that could have gone against Shiv in terms of his man management credentials, then it would be a shame. With Sammy, I can see what you're saying. I mean, he dropped a promo as soon as he got the job on social media. That even got me hyped, believing, oh, wow, we can win this World Cup. So Sammy's someone who's got the charisma. He's good at sort of, as you said, Mash, building that connection again with fans and stakeholders. I think over the past few years, that's kind of been cut. I think Sammy brings back that feel-good factor, literally rally around the West Indies. Like, he's bringing back that factor. However, if you're looking at it from an objective point of view, as you said, it does send mixed messages in terms of why are we appointing Sammy when he hasn't got the relevant coaching credentials. And especially at a time, it's not as if this is a quiet time. We've got World Cup qualifiers in 5 weeks' time. And then the T20 World Cup is at home in the West Indies next year. So arguably for white ball cricket, this is the biggest year or so in West Indies cricket history in terms of what's on the line if we firstly fail to qualify for the ODI World Cup and then also underperform at our own home T20 World Cup. So this is a massive roll of the dice on Cricket West Indies. But I just wonder, Mash, is this a reflection of where our white ball game is at the moment in terms of it felt they did have to take a massive gamble to sort of succeed? Because you just feel with West Indies at the moment in the white ball game, we're picking the best players. It's not as if, I mean, obviously, arguably you can have like a Hetmyer or a Lewis, 1 or 2, but generally these are the best white ball players in the region playing for the side. So if we've got the best players and we're underperforming, have Cricket West Indies, have the stakeholders just thought, you know what, we just need someone like a Sammy to build up that confidence again, motivate them and fulfill their potential. I just wonder if that's the case. And as you said, combined with if Shiv, obviously it's a rumor at this point, if Shiv was having problems with personnel at Jamaica Talawas, did they just feel that would be the wrong appointment for the role needed as a West Indies head coach at this point in time?
Do you know what? I want to throw something else into the kind of mix here as well. First things first, with Sammy, who's going to be his backroom staff? Normally with a head coach, you pick who your staff is, right? So, for example, when Phil was in the role, he had Monty Desai. Monty Desai was his guy, right? From back in the day, he'd worked with him before, he brought his people in. I wonder who Sammy's going to bring in. Who are the people that Sammy's going to bring around him for batting coach, bowling coach, fitness, this, that? And will we... Oh, was that addressed before I continue?
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say, yeah. So Johnny Grave or Kishore Salo, one of them did say the head coach makes a recommendation to the board of directors about who they want as a support staff, but the language used in it very much suggested that could be overruled. They could have their own sort of ideas. So for me, I'm wondering if Sammy could have people coming in recommended who bring in, but also it leaves the door opening for Cricket West Indies to say, these are the guys you will be working with who we feel will bring the best out of you in the role.
So Natalia has raised exactly what I was about to say. Because if I'm Darren Sammy, I'm turning to the people from my generation. Remember, Darren Sammy was part of whether he was a GOAT or not is irrelevant. He was part of the GOAT generation. So you mean to tell me that Darren Sammy isn't going to turn around to a DJ Bravo and say, come through? Is he going to turn to a Kyron Pollard or a Chris Gale or whoever it might be and say, you know what? You lot were part of the GOAT generation that won 2 World Cups. Samuel Badri, for example. Come through, let's educate these youths on how we did it and why we were able to do whatever. And I'm telling you now, Santokie, to me that makes sense. But I can tell you, if Darren Sammy turns to Chris Gale and says, come onto my backroom stuff, the cuss out is gonna be intense if that's what happens. But I just wonder, would Sammy not turn to his contemporaries who were part of that era with him and say, come through, let's try and help these youths and try and help them build a new legacy for West Indies cricket? So that's issue one I've got. The second issue I've got is, what if Sammy... So when we had Justice Thompson on, right, and obviously the T20 independent report that he did with Lara and Mickey Arthur, if Sammy has read that, which I assume he was, in fact, Sammy had contributed to it, if I remember rightly. Yeah. Is Darren Sammy now going to be the person who has the sense to sit down with Shimron Hetmyer? Let me just throw their names in. People are going to cuss, but let's just throw their names in. Will he be the person to sit down with Shimron Hetmyer, Andre Russell, Sunil Narain, Evan Lewis, and ad infinitum and say to them, you know what? you lot have beef with certain people in West Indies cricket, but I'm Daren Sammy, right? I've led people like you who have had beef with West Indies cricket come through. Let me show you how the pattern's going to work from here. So I just wonder as well, will Darren Sammy, because he's of this generation, because he's somebody who's looked up to, will he, so rather than Desmond Haynes saying to Nicholas Pooran, I beg you phone Sunil Narain, I kind of get the sense that Darren Sammy might actually do some of this stuff himself. So does that bring a level of difference to how the head coach role might be with someone like Sammy in the job? And finally, my final point, Santokie, is who selected the World Cup squad? Did Darren Sammy have a say in it? Or was this squad put on him? What do you think about all that, Santokie?
Well, first point, yeah, I think for sure you'd imagine Samuel Badju would come in as an assistant coach just because he was on the South Africa leg. And as you said, he was under Sammy in those World Cup wins. Logic would dictate DJ Barber as a bowling coach, Kyron Pollard as a batting coach. You know, they've been doing those gigs in the IPL. However, we don't know if financially that's viable or if they even want to do that and go back into the cauldron that is West Indies cricket. But those would be obvious appointments. In terms of the squad as well, I think it was a statement. I think it was a time statement for the squad to come out 24 hours before the coaches were named, just to say the coaches were not part of this selection. This is the squad that we've picked, the selectors have picked, and then the coaches will work with that. I think if Sammy did have an input on the squads, it would have been named after he was appointed as a head coach. So I think those are the. What was your second point again? Sorry, Mash.
Oh, no, you've kind of covered all that. So my last point. Oh, no, you've kind of... Oh, no, speaking to the players who are exiled at the moment.
Yeah, no, I think definitely. I think especially in 2016 when it was very much them against us in terms of the players and the board. I think the likes of a Dre Russ and an Evan Lewis who were at that tournament, they'll have more faith in a Sammy to represent the players and be on that side. So I think that could be a factor. And as you said, I think Sammy would have... I don't think Sammy's the type of guy who would say, like you said, oh, I'll let Pooran speak to Narain. I think Sammy would just reach out straight away, be a proactive person. So I think those are benefits. And I think as much as we've pointed out, you know, what could be seen as negatives, I think a massive positive to this is T20's changed so much in the last 5 years. Sammy's been playing in T20 cricket up until last year. He's aware of the tactical innovations, the setup, how it works. He knows all the players in T20 World Cricket. He would have played with them in franchise cricket for other teams internationally and in franchise cricket. So he's very much got an awareness of modern T20 cricket, which you could argue Phil Simmons maybe not necessarily didn't have in the most recent years. So I think there are benefits to Sammy's appointment, but at the same time, as with a lot of things with West Indies cricket, there are big question marks over this. So it will be interesting to see, Mash. And I think it's very telling we spent about 20 minutes talking about Sammy. We haven't mentioned the appointment of Coley as Red Bull coach, and I think that's more indicative of the fact that Coley, Mash, from my opinion and probably yours as well, was a logical selection as a Red Bull coach.
Yeah, so I'm gonna transition into Coley in a second, actually, because it relates to a point I'm gonna make. Here's my only concern. Here's a genuine concern I've got though. If you had said to me 3 months ago, Darren Sammy's going to be West Indies T20 head coach, I would have said, okay, cool. It is what it is. I kind of get it. But he's also going to be head coach of the ODI side, Santokie. Now, I can't... ODI cricket is the one format we need, like, divine intervention to help our ODI side, right? We got ODI World Cup qualifiers coming up in a month. Obviously, Sammy is now in position. I'm not saying Sammy can't galvanize the ODI side. I'm not trying to say that. But I am saying that the ODI side needs significant help to overturn decades and decades, like years and years of failure, right? What credentials... You can tell me about Sammy and T20 cricket, but what credentials can you tell me that justify him being the ODI coach? That's why I would have had somebody from overseas when it comes to the ODI format cricket, just because of how bad we are at that format of cricket. Do you think that Sammy's motivational skills, coaching, whatever, rubs off in both formats of cricket?
I don't. I think ODI cricket is very different to T20 cricket in terms of how you approach the game, the longer format, and also the players we have available in the ODI format. So for me, that was the big talking point. I mean, as I've highlighted, Sammy's credentials in T20 cricket, you can see why he's given that gig. ODI cricket, essentially the immediate need to succeed in ODI cricket. It's not as if he'll get the bilaterals against UAE, 3 bilaterals, whatever after that, but within a month, he's essentially playing World Cup qualifiers, which are massive, massive pressure. And he's not someone, I don't know when the last time he played ODI cricket was, or 50 over cricket. He's someone who in the last 5-6 years has been associated purely with T20 cricket. So it's a massive gamble. And if we're being honest, he has no real credentials to be the ODI coach, especially when you factor in what's on in the line, which is why there will be debate in the region about Shimron Hetmyer and whether he should have got the job over Sammy, purely because he has the coaching credentials, which could give you more confidence. So it's a massive risk. I mean, he could prove us wrong. His man motivation might be able to get us over the line, but if we don't qualify for the ODI World Cup, is Sammy going to make it to the T20 World Cup next year? Is he even going to last that long to demonstrate his strongest format skills?
How do we know?
Question.
Listen, how do we know that if we don't qualify for ODI World Cup, how do we know that he might not just once the inevitable cuss out comes and he's blamed for everything, along with Shea Hope and everybody else? How do we know he might not just do what Nicholas Pooran did and just hiss his teeth and say, you know what? I can't bother with this. This is long.
Do you think, Mash, it's interesting because you know what? With Nicholas Pooran, it's good you mentioned that. We always talked about how he didn't need to be West Indies captain. He was essentially doing it for the pride of West Indies. Do you think Darren Sammy Sammy's doing it for the pride, or do you think he needs to be the West Indies coach? And this is what will improve his credentials? Because if you think about it, in CPL, St. Lucia Zouks, he was head coach last year. I think they came 4th. They finished 4th in the playoffs.
They got to the semis, yeah.
And then
they were the eliminators or whatever.
Yeah, in the PSL, Zalmi as well got to the eliminators, but finished 3rd, I believe. So he hasn't won T20 franchise tournaments. So do you think, what I'm asking is does Darren Sammy is he doing this for the pride, do you think, or is this going to be something which is valuable for him, which he will see as improving his coaching sort of legacy?
Do you know what? I actually think Sammy, this is similar to when Lara took the, what's his job called? Performance mentor or whatever Lara's job is, right? I actually think Sammy comes from an era where playing for West Indies and representing West Indies still matters. And actually, it's that thing, isn't it? If West Indies come calling, you're not going to say no. Now, it may well be that 10 years from now, we enter an era where actually players just like, I don't care if West Indies come calling, I'm just saying no. But Sammy is still from that era of cricket where representing the West Indies in whatever format, in whatever way, is still seen as something highly significant. When Bravo and Pollard and that lot retired, even after they were exiled from West Indies cricket, they still spoke about how representing West Indies was important to them. Even Chris Gale spoke about how representing West Indies was important to him. So I actually think it's not even about his legacy. It's about they love West Indies cricket and they can't say no. Because if you're Darren Sammy, there is nothing to be gained from there's nothing positive to be gained for his legacy from being the head coach of West Indies. Because even if he did something good, you know that failure is coming just round the corner, right? So it could never be a career move to enhance his legacy. Yeah. It's because the love is just still there to represent West Indies regardless. But let's move on, Santokie. You referenced hold on, Natalia said the audacity of Sammy. but you referenced Coley. Let's move to Coley. Now, I think you and I obviously were speaking in the WhatsApp before the announcement were made, and we both kind of said that we expected Coley to get one. And from the minute we both expected Coley to get one, we just assumed if he was going to get one, it was going to be the Red Bull job, because the Red Bull job, when it was first announced in the job description, effectively said that whoever gets this has to work with the academy. They have to work with the A team. They have to work with development in the region. Obviously, West Indies only play about 6 tests a year on average anyway, so it can't just be for the Red Bull cricket. It's part of a wider developmental structure, A team tours, academy tours, etc. Sammy could never get a job like that because, with respect, his international commitments means he's never going to get a job like that. Anybody who got that Red Bull job had to be somebody who is completely committed to development, within the wider Caribbean and is willing to give up all of their time for developmental structures going from island to island, country to country, so on and so forth. So once Coley was in the conversation, he was always going to get it. What's just bizarre to me, Santokie, is Coley was the same coach who took the white ball sides to South Africa, drew 1-1 in the ODI series and won the T20 series. So there was an argument to say if he was going to get one, he actually should have got the white ball job. But I don't think there would have been decent enough candidates to do something that Coley's already doing and is willing to do. Do you get what I'm saying in terms of Red Bull?
Yeah, it's interesting, because there's a school of thought that maybe Coley should have carried on for the World Cup qualifiers, just because he'd been with the side in South Africa, had that experience, knows the players. So there could be an argument that maybe it would have been better for Sammy to take over the white ball coach after, or something along those lines. But yeah, it's an interesting one. I think going back to what you said about the Red Bull, I think in terms of a suitable candidate who knows West Indies from a development level to senior level, you're not going to get anyone better than Coley. I mean, some might argue, but he lost in South Africa 2-0. But I don't think any coach in the world would have been able to improve West Indies' chances against South Africa in South Africa. So from a holistic point of view, looking at it, what Coley knows about the region, his experience, when he featured on our podcast a few months ago, just the level of expertise and knowledge he has about the region. There's not many in the region, I think, who can match him for that. So for me, there's no issues with Coley being a Red Bull coach. But as you said, it does throw a spanner into the works that he did do well with the white ball team. But I think from Cricket West Indies' point of view, they probably had always earmarked him for that Red Bull role. So I think 2 matches in South Africa wasn't going to change their sort of thinking. But it will be interesting to see if he is even involved in the World Cup qualifiers, maybe alongside Sammy or something, because you just feel... So, like we said, we've talked about Sammy's T20 credentials purely because he doesn't have any ODI coaching credentials. So to throw him into that cauldron of World Cup qualifiers by himself, it's a recipe for disaster, especially as Coley was with the test side in Zimbabwe. So he'll have a little inclination about the conditions, albeit in a different format. So I wonder if he will pair up with Sammy for those World Cup qualifiers in some capacity.
That's a really good point. I hadn't even considered that. And the minute you said it, I was like, that's a no-brainer. Like, even if Sammy wants his own people, Coley's got to go. He just got to go. He was the last person to work with the ODI side. He was the last person to go to Zimbabwe. He has to go, even if they say it's some kind of glorified consultation role. He's got to go. Yeah. So yeah, I agree with you on that, Cole. For the specifics of that World Cup qualifiers. Sorry, I would expect that Coley should be going to that. Just quickly though, because Carlos raises this question: is there any other team in the world that would have considered or hired these 2 coaches to lead their senior teams? I reckon Sammy would have got a job elsewhere. Yeah. I think so, because Sammy's name is global. Darren Sammy, rightly or wrongly, Darren Sammy is seen as a GOAT of West Indies cricket from a captaincy perspective. So I could see Darren Sammy applying for a job, not of a major side per se, but I could see him getting a job. So actually, Sammy, yes. And then, as Santokie just explained, I think given what the Red Bull coach's role is supposed to be, I don't think an overseas coach is going to come to the Caribbean and do all that. And actually, Santokie, I'm going to just raise one last point that people should consider when talking about coaches. There is a tweet that I've put out like every so often on our Twitter handle, which lists all of the coaches we've had since the year 2000 up till now. From Gus Logie and Roger Harper to Phil Simmons recently, nobody has broken the 37% win barrier range. It's ranged from 37% down to 30%. So there is an argument to say, Santokie, no matter what people's critiques are, there is an argument to say it don't matter who the coach is. We know that there's only, at best, they're making a 1% difference at the very best. So people have to be realistic as well. And short of these 2 appointments being an absolute disaster, we already kind of know how successful a West Indian coach can be, whoever that may be, in the context of our cricket. So I think it would be a misnomer to say how did this person get the job? How did that person get the job? When in reality, it don't matter who gets the job. They're all roughly going to be around the same kind of percentage anyway.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, there's only so much a coach can do. And I think also, Mash, because it hasn't been, I know there were rumours that Otis Gibson applied, Donovan Miller was one name that popped up, but we don't know who else applied other than Shivnai and Chandapur. We don't even have the context as to what the competition was like for the field, what the calibre of coaches were. So at this point in time, I guess, Mash, all we have to do is just hope that Sammy, can galvanise the side and get us through to those ODI main tournament in India in October. So, I think, should we move on? Should we move on to the World Cup qualifying squad, Mash?
Yeah, 100%. So that's the coaches, people. We could go for another half an hour discussing that, but we have named this as looking at the West Indies World Cup qualifiers as well in terms of squad names. So, people, I haven't put it up on the screen. I should have done, but boy, I was tired. The World Cup qualifiers squad has been named as follows: Shea Hope, captain; Rodman Powell, vice captain; Shamar Brooks, Yannick Correa, Casey Carty, Roston Chase, Jason Holder, Akil Hussain, Alzari Joseph, Brandon King, Carl Mayers, Gudakesh Moti, Kimo Paul, Nicholas Puran, Romario Shepherd. Now, Santokie, I believe you tweeted something that the only people who are out from the squad that went to South Africa, one was Odean Smith. Can't remember who said the other person was.
Shannon
Gabriel, right? So the only changes from this World Cup qualifiers squad, from the squad that went to South Africa, which was our last ODI engagement, is Odean Smith is out. And actually, Odean Smith is going to the UAE just before the World Cup qualifiers anyways. And Shannon Gabriel is completely out. In comes Kimo Paul. And who's the other person to get in? Gudakesh Moti, right? You go first, Santokie. What were your key? When you saw that squad, what was the first things that went through your mind?
Where did Kimo Paul come from? If you'd asked me, I probably would have had Dennis Bulai ahead of him, coming into the ODI squad. There's always, with West Indies cricket, I think this is similar to our show on when we did the A-team tour. Generally, 80% of the squad we could have predicted, it's true to form. And then there's always one or two left field choices which make you just scratch your head. Kimo Paul, for context, he last played an ODI for West Indies in August, I believe, against New Zealand. He didn't play in the Super 50 tournament because of injury. He's been playing red ball cricket for Guyana Harpy Eagles. And just out of nowhere, we've decided, you know what? Biggest ODI games in recent West Indies history. Let's throw Kimo Paul in there and hype him up as a three-dimensional player. I think, Machel, what's really telling is the top 5 wicket takers in the Super 50, none of them are in the squad. So what are we saying about Super 50? Just so people are aware, Shannon Gabriel was the top wicket taker in the Super 50. Odean Smith was second. Nicholson Gordon of Jamaica was third. Kofi James of Leeward Islands was fourth, and Dennis Bulai was fifth with his spin. So none of the 5 top wicket takers of our regional premier competition are in this World Cup squad, and instead you've got Kimo Paul in. And when we talked time and time again, Mash, about the ODI side, the lack of strike bowlers and ability to take wickets, we've gone with Kimo Paul to back up Alzari Joseph. So just go into, do you think Kimo Paul is the man to do this job?
If ever something convinced me, let me start again. When Desmond Haynes and Roland Butcher's contracts end, I'm actually going to apply for the West Indies selector's job. I'm actually now not even joking. I'm seriously going to apply for the West Indies selector's job, because my argument has always been the same with selection. Whatever you do and whoever you pick, make sure the rationale makes sense, right? I am not doubting that Kimo Paul is a good cricketer. I think he's been hard done by in terms of injuries. I think when he first broke into the West Indies team in 2019, he looked set to have a really good career. I think he could still have a good career once he's completely clear of his injuries. But how on earth can you go into ODI World Cup qualifiers and pick someone and he played one game for the Harpy Eagles in red ball cricket, right, this season, one game. So the last time he played cricket was one game for the Harpy Eagles. And yes, he took 5 wickets, but that's the last time he played, right? He went to South Africa for that SA20. He played some games, but he didn't do anything significant, you'd say, right? The last time I think he played for West Indies was India last year. India in 2022, I think, July maybe. Was that right, Santokie? I think he was part of some India squad or something like that. The point I'm making ultimately is Kimo Paul does not have a sustained level of cricket behind him that justifies him getting into the side. Yes, you can say you are picking him, but in fact, no, because actually, let me get the word, Santokie. This is what Desmond Haynes said. Paul is a three-dimensional player who can bowl the new ball effectively. He's dynamic in the outfield, and he can also make vital runs. He is now fully recovered from injury, and with his skill set, we see him as a match winner. When I read that, Santokie, I read that as, so now Kimo Paul is fit, you just chucked him straight into World Cup qualifiers with what cricket behind him? Even if we acknowledge that Kimo Paul is a talented cricketer, what cricket has he got behind him? What match fitness has he got? And Santokie, let's actually raise this point as well. So why did they take Shannon Gabriel to South Africa then?
Yeah, this is the thing.
And if Kimo Paul was always on the radar, you should have made that clear when the South Africa squad was picked and said, you know what, we're kind of looking at Kimo Paul in the background, but he's not fit at the moment, so we're going to take Shannon Gabriel, who they then didn't play. My argument, Santokie, is that they are desperate. They looked at the 2018 World Cup qualifiers where Kimo Paul played, and they said, well, boy, he did well in Zimbabwe last time. Let's just pick, man. That I genuinely believe that is the justification they've used, because there is no other clear justification they could give to randomly pick Kimo Paul. Because if they're going to go, he's a three-dimensional player, well, pick Fabian Allen then. He's a three-dimensional player. What do you mean he's a three-dimensional player? Man's not fit. Well, man just come off fitness. What come off injury? What do you mean? Yeah. Well, Santokie, make sense of it for me.
I think you've raised a good point about him doing well. I'd even consider that in 2018 in Zimbabwe. That could very much be a factor. I just think I agree with you, Mash. Kimo Paul's a good player, you know, like he's played in the IPL. We know he's a good player. But to bring him in when we desperately need wickets, put all your hopes on Kimo Paul coming up with the wickets in big World Cup qualifiers is a massive, massive gamble. And where's the justification? So this is one thing I'd like Desmond Haynes to address in the press conference. Shannon Gabriel's leading wicket taker at Super 50. He went to South Africa, didn't play in any ODIs. What was the criteria for then dropping him from these World Cup qualifying squad then? Did you see something in training or practice at the net sessions which you thought, hold on, this guy can't do it at ODI level cricket? He's Shannon Gabriel, so they would have seen enough of him over his career to know what he can offer. So why wasn't Shannon Gabriel picked in his World Cup qualifier squads? And also, the fact that we're highlighting Kimo Paul as a three-dimensional player who can also score runs, we don't need anyone that can score runs. We just need out-and-out strike wicket taker bowlers. So Kimo Paul has never been someone who you can rely on to be a strike bowler with the new ball in white ball cricket, 50 over cricket so far in his career. So to rely on him to support Alzari Joseph and Jason Holder is a madness, because I'm assuming Kimo Paul will probably get into the 11 in the World Cup qualifiers if they brought him in and hyped him up as a three-dimensional player. And I think one also thing that's reflective of the state of where Kimo Paul is at the moment, it was asked in a press conference with Cricket West Indies on yesterday why all the players in the IPL, you know, like a Carl Mayers, Jason Holder, had been given a break and aren't featuring against UAE. Kimo Paul's in the IPL as a net bowler. He is playing against UAE, and they were asked, the journalist asked, why is Kimo Paul going to play against UAE in Sharjah when he's been in the IPL? And then it was Jimmy Adams, I think, who said Kimo Paul personally requested it because he hasn't been playing any cricket in the IPL. He's not got enough game time. He feels he needs match sharpness. So he requested personally to take part in the UAE series. So that also reflects the state of things where Kimo Paul himself doesn't believe he's got enough recent game time and is basically trying to get that game time in the 3 ODIs against UAE. So with what's on stake, Mash, if this was a bilateral series, I wouldn't have any complaints.
Yeah, I wouldn't care. Yeah.
But with what is on stake, big World Cup qualifiers, this could be something, you know, in hindsight, if we don't make the World Cup qualifiers, we'll look back and say another foolish selection decision.
But Santokie, and a couple of people have said it in the comments, and let me just address the Fabian Allen point, because I think people took that point literally. I'm not saying Fabian Allen should have been in the squad. I was more just throwing his name to say, once Haynes said, "Oh, we've picked Paul because he's 3-dimensional," there's lots of players who are 3-dimensional. That doesn't mean they should just be in the squad, though. Like, what are you talking about, right? Here's my thing, Santokie. It's World Cup qualifiers. You need a strike bowler, right? Go to Sheldon Cottrell then. Man's just been playing in cool and smooth, right? We know he's fit. He's actually been playing some cricket. We know that Sheldon Cottrell is a power play bowler. At least do that. At least do something. And as you say, I couldn't care less if Kimo Paul can bat. He shouldn't be in the team because you need somebody to bat at number 8. What are you talking about? That don't make no sense. Anyways, whatever. He's there. When you look at, and I hope he does well, to be fair. But when you look at the squad, Santokie, they better be hoping. Let me get the squad back up again. They better be hoping that there is absolutely no pace on offer in Zimbabwe. I think they have made they've made a big gamble here that you don't need pace, because when I saw the squad, the first thing that went in, the first thing that crossed my mind was Alzarri Joseph is the only genuine wicket-taking pace bowler in the whole squad. What happens if Alzarri Joseph breaks down, Santokie? What's the plan? What's the plan if Alzarri Joseph breaks down, right? You're telling me that it's Jason Holder and Kimo Paul to the rescue? Come on, man. Come on, man. So basically, Santokie, I don't think, to be fair, we need to worry that much about the batters. I think we can look at the batters and we can look at a Shea Hope and a Shamar Brooks and Brandon King, Carl Mayers, Nicholas Puran, etc., and we can expect them to do some stuff. Okay, and then those like Holder and Romario Shepherd and that lot in the lower order, they can do some stuff. But I think they're hoping, Santokie, that Gudakesh Motie just has a wonderful time in Zimbabwe. That I think based on that squad, they are hoping that Akil Hussain and Gudakesh Motie get conditions that suit them, and that's where our bowling will come to the fore, because that would explain to me why they've not gone in with another out-and-out strike bowler, because they expect the spinners, and I'm going to have to throw Roston Chase in there as well. They're expecting the spinners to have to do something.
Yes, that. But the thing is, in white ball cricket, ODI cricket, you always need at least 2 pace options. So, for all we know, the plan might be to have Carey, Chase, Hussain and Motie bowl 40 overs every match between them and go with spin. But I just think Zimbabwe, I know spin is going to play a massive part, but it's not an exclusive spin deck. It's not like somewhere you see in the subcontinent. I do think you will need at least two genuine strike bowlers with pace. So I just think we're leaving ourselves short. And like you said, we're treading on thin ice with Alzarri Joseph, because hopefully not. But if there's a lot of games, if he does pick up, a fitness issue or an injury issue, where do we go from there? We're struggling. We saw against South Africa, they scored 267 runs in 30 overs, which is a world record. So our bowling has not been doing what has been required. So I just think it's a recipe for disaster looking at the bowling lineup, Mash. We just have to hope that Kimo Paul does come good and lives up to the high expectations that Desmond Haynes has put on him.
Lastly, let's just address 2 other kind of elephants in the room that I'm sure people are wondering. Do you know what? I expected Yannick Correa to be there. But I think he's there, Santokie, purely, again, it's the leg spin premium. He's there because he can bowl some kind of leg spin, not because he should actually be there, if you see what I mean. So I actually kind of get why he's there, and I've made my peace with it. Should Roston Chase be there, though, Santokie? Instead of Kevin Sinclair?
It depends what you're bringing. This is the thing, like, Roston Chase is like a chameleon in the West Indies side. You don't know what they're bringing in for. They're bringing in for runs, or they bring like whatever argument you bring in about why Roston Chase shouldn't be in the squad. There's a counter argument that he's in the squad for something else. Like, you could say, oh, his spin's not as effective as Kevin Sinclair, which is not based on Kevin Sinclair's recent form. But then the counter argument would be, oh, but he's coming in for the runs that he can contribute down the order. So I think Roston Chase, just because of his knack for being known as a batter and a bowler, and nobody's really sure what he specializes in, he sort of just slips through. But I don't think Roston Chase should be in the squad. He hasn't played an ODI in about a year and a half. I don't know what he could bring to the side. If you are bringing him in for his spin as a part-time spinner, I'd rather you just throw in a full-time spinner then. Bring in a Kevin Sinclair. I don't think like you said, Mash, I don't think our batting, we'd have that much to worry about. We scored 335 against South Africa. I don't think you need a Austin Chase to come in to contribute runs lower down the order. Similar with Kimo Paul. I don't think they're needed because our top order are solid. They can put up runs. So I just think if you are going with Chase for a spin option, then why not go with a full-time specialist spinner? So as always, that seems to be the case for the last year, Mash. It tends to be Carey and Austin Chase, the constant questions about how they still manage to make the side when all criteria suggest that they shouldn't be anywhere near it.
Yeah, I think with Chase, I've kind of just given up trying to make sense of anything. I just expect to see his name. And I think the thing with Austin Chase is it's clear that Desmond Haynes and Roland Butcher like him. I think that's now just obvious. I think he will always be picked based on his potential to do something. But my issue with that is it always means that somebody else is not being picked on what they're actually doing, because as long as you always have the mindset that Austin Chase's ceiling is somewhere up there, irrespective of whether he actually produces to that ceiling, he'll always get a pick. And because Chase is in that squad, Correa is probably the same. I don't even right now when I look at the 11, and obviously the World Cup qualifiers aren't for a month at the moment. I couldn't actually tell you who's in the team. I couldn't tell you who makes I don't even know what our strongest 11 is. But whatever strongest 11 people write down, the one thing that people always come back and look at is, do you genuinely believe that that 11 that you've picked has the ability to restrict sides to low totals? And that's my worry. No matter which side I write down, I'm always like, yep, they're going to make 300 against that side. So if our batting doesn't come off in the World Cup qualifiers, well, boy, that's all I'll just say, boy. Because
I think looking at it, if I was to say our top 6 will be King, Mayers, Brooks, Hope, Pooran, and Powell. So you'd be confident that at least 2 of those could pull it off in the World Cup qualifiers. As you said, though, if that's not the case, and also when they are batting, you'd have to get them to put 320 to 350 up every single game for us to realistically be confident of winning that. But yeah, whichever 11 we choose will be unbalanced based on the players we selected. There's no sort of strategy to the selections. It's like they've just thrown out names based on no overall strategy about what the team selection should look like. But Mash, one thing I do want to talk about, I think generally the batting lineup you can pretty confidently select it. But a lot of fans I've noticed have been messaging us saying Shamar Brooks should be out the side. Now it's interesting because I don't know what they're basing it on. Are they basing it on the fact is Shamar Brooks? Because last year he almost scored the exact same amount of runs as Shai Hope, and Shai Hope people credit as having an outstanding year last year for West Indies. So Shamar Brooks was one of our outstanding performers with the bat last year. So I just don't see where it's coming from, based on the fact we've only played 2 ODIs this year so far, where it's coming from that he's just suddenly dropped.
No, Shamar Brooks is a given in the side. He's an absolute lock in the side. The reason why some people want Shamar Brooks out is because he's just not a name. He's not a name. I think anybody who says drop Shamar Brooks, their issue is that he's not a name. And when they're kind of looking for somebody to be the scapegoat, he's the easy person to say, well, drop him then. But if you actually study the ODI record, Shamar Brooks is one of the first names in the team based on actual production rate in ODI cricket. So anybody who's studying information properly, you could never come up with any logical argument to drop Shamar Brooks. So that's not in my equation at all. One thing we should, though, just definitely mention, Santokie, before we bring this one to a close, is the squad that's been selected to play the 3 games against the United Arab Emirates. Now, obviously, that squad is affected by the fact that the IPL will finish late. So the IPL players are getting a rest. I think they're getting a short rest in the Caribbean before flying out to Zim for the World Cup qualifier. So it won't feature many of the IPL players. So that squad, Santokie, is Shai Hope, Brandon King, Alec Athanaze, Shamar Brooks, Yannick Correa, Casey Carty, Roston Chase, Dominic Drakes, Kavem Hodge, Akeem Jordan, Gudakesh Moti, Kimo Paul, Raymond Reefer, Odin Smith, Devon Thomas. Now, before I get into that conversation, Santokie, we must address one thing. I think this now explains why certain people were picked to go to Bangladesh, because I now think that some of those players, like a Yannick Correa, like a Casey Carty, were picked to go to Bangladesh for the A Tour to get some cricket in before the World Cup qualifiers. Now, I still don't necessarily agree that they should have been there, but I think that was the justification for their pick. And if that was the justification, again, I say to Cricket West Indies, say that then. I'm saying that because that's what I think you've done. But what I'm saying to Cricket West Indies is if that's your rationale for when you do stuff, say it clearly in a press release so people don't ask questions of what you're actually doing. Right? Similarly, Devon Thomas, I think, has gone on that A tour to probably get some cricket before the Test series against India. Same for Raymond Reefer and so on and so forth, right? But there's a few names, Santokie, in the A tour. Two questions I'll put to you. Sorry, A tour. Two questions I'll put to you. Do you think the UAE series is a dress rehearsal for some players to maybe make a last-minute claim to get into the World Cup squad? Or do you think the World Cup squad is set and somebody would only come in if there's an injury? And the reason why I say that is somebody like Akeem Jordan. So Kimo Paul came in out of nowhere. If you're going to take Akeem Jordan to the UAE and he's already part of the test squad and he's going to Bangladesh, why would you not put him in the World Cup squad then? Do you get where I'm coming from, Santokie? It don't make no sense. If you can make a rationale in your head to say, yeah, we'll take Akeem Jordan to the United Arab Emirates, we'll take him to Bangladesh to play in the A-team tour, but we'll just bring Kimo Paul in from nowhere to go to the World Cup. Do you see what I'm talking about, Santokie? The logic ain't logicking. It don't make no sense there. So do you think there's a few players in that UAE series who will maybe force their way into the World Cup squad?
It's hard to know because I heard Johnny Gray speaking to the media last week emphasised how Cricket West Indies, the standard is to take 15 players on any away tours or assignments because of financial reasons. Now, so they've got the 15-man World Cup squad already announced. However, because of what's on the line, you'd imagine if an Afanese hit a 140 against UAE or Dominic Drakes took a fifer, surely, based on momentum and recency bias, they would be included in the World Cup qualifier squad. So I do think there's an opportunity, especially as you said, with the ball. I think if a Drakes can perform, for instance, I think he could fast track himself into that World Cup qualifier squad as a backup to come in. And likewise with an Afanese or an Odean Smith, you never know if they will, because I think West Indies will probably buck the trend and include more than 15 players if there is a need for it because of how important the World Cup qualifiers are, because it'd be stupid to ignore someone in form against UAE. Because then otherwise, I know it's to get initial experience playing international cricket is what's been stated, but surely if they are performing based on momentum, you would just include them in the World Cup qualifying squad. That's my opinion. So I think it would have to be an outstanding performance from players to make it into that World Cup qualifying squad, but I do think there's scope.
So what happens then, because some of those players who are playing in the UAE series have already got their place locked in for the World Cup. Again, not to kind of pick on Kimo Paul, but to use him. We can also use Roston Chase. Yeah. Kimo Paul requested to leave the IPL to go and play these games against the UAE because he's not playing any cricket. Kimo Paul hasn't played any proper first-class kind of proper cricket since the first round of the West Indies Championship for Guyana, right? Say Kimo Paul in those 3 games against UAE plays and he's dreadful, but he's already locked his place in. Say Roston Chase plays in those 3 games against UAE and is absolutely dreadful, and somebody in that squad against UAE outperforms him. So for Kimo Paul, say Akeem Jordan outperforms him or Dominic Drakes. For Roston Chase, say, well, there's no other off spinner there, but Roston Chase can't get dropped no matter what. For Roston Chase, say, I don't know, Kavem Hodge outperformed him. What do you do then, Santokie? Or do you just think, well, boy, they've selected the World Cup squad. It is what it is.
You have to purely to save face as a selector. You can't back Kimo Paul as a 3-dimensional star and then have him drop from the World Cup squad after 3 games. So whether it be the right thing to do for the benefit of the team, that's something we can debate. But if you're Desmond Haynes or a selector, to save face, because the World Cup squad is meant to be a long-term plan. This is meant to be the World Cup qualifying squad is meant to be built up. So it would reveal essentially the short-termism of it all if we were to drop Kimo Paul mere days after calling him a 3-dimensional star for the side. So I think to save face, these players will definitely be in Zimbabwe, no matter how they perform against UAE. And it will be styled out in the press or media releases, as you know. They're just getting familiar with getting back into international cricket. But if you were looking at what's beneficial for West Indies cricket, you would use the UAE games as a trial. Whoever's on form, you just drop them into the World Cup matches in Zimbabwe based on form, which is likely to be more beneficial. But I think purely to save face and from a PR perspective, I think the selectors will back the squad they've gone with initially.
So people, and by the way, people, I didn't say at any point in this particular video, do make sure you like, or maybe said at the beginning, do make sure you like, share, subscribe to Caribbean Cricket Podcast. You can, in fact, Rising Bowler just did it for us, just as I was about to say it. Hit the like button, share, subscribe. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Carib Cricket, all of that jazz. We always forget to plug ourselves properly, so do that before you go. Last talking point, Santokie, and then we'll wrap it. And we have to have this talking point because it's happened literally in the last hour before we went on air. So about an hour ago, somebody sent me a screenshot from Shimron Hetmyer's wife. Basically, in fact, let me find the exact thing she said, because I'm just going to read it verbatim. So Shimron Hetmyer's wife posted on Instagram, @ing her husband, Shimron Hetmyer. So they posted the team for the qualifiers, love. The fact this is even an Instagram conversation is flipping wild, Santokie. So they posted the team for the qualifiers, love. I know how much you wanted to be a part of that, even when you spoke to Jimmy Adams, who I presume JA is, and made yourself clear on the matter. I'm surprised Cricket West Indies did not mention that you made yourself available, but they chose their own team, telling you they are resting you as an excuse. I was hoping it would have been made clear why you didn't make the cut for the team. Sorry, love, @Shimron Hetmyer. Shimron Hetmyer has then retweeted or what do you call it in Instagram? Reposted, whatever. He's reposted that post from his wife and commented above it, "Thanks for always supporting me, my love. Kiss emoji." Santokie, please, Santokie, take it away.
This is, you know what? This is going to come up. This is going to be the first question for Desmond Haynes, I think, in the selectors conference. What's going on with Hetmyer? I think the bottom line is, as much as people will say Hetmyer, based on talent, should be in the West Indies side, you're looking at two big factors. One, he hasn't played an ODI for West Indies cricket in 2 years. So why are you suddenly going to throw a man in, especially when the batting is so settled? The batting lineup is so settled. And two, the man missed the plane for the World Cup last year, and he's not said anything about it since. Are we just gonna brush that? Are we just gonna brush that under the carpet? It's not a minor thing. The man missed the plane for the. He's the only player, as far as I'm aware, he's the only player in World Cup history to miss a plane for the World Cup, and there's no explanation, no apology, no rationale as to why it happened. It's a big elephant in the room, Mash. I just think it's too soon to suddenly, throw him into World Cup qualifiers. I don't know what your opinion is on it.
As I messaged you, WhatsApped you before we went on air, or about however long ago it was, I said to you, and everyone who's watching this, these were my exact. If I'm going to read the exact words I sent to Santokie about 2 hours ago, after I saw all the stuff from Shimron and his wife, I said to Santokie, where is it? Let me find out what I said. Okay, I said, Santokie, I don't want to sound like an old West Indian uncle, but surely Shimron owes the West Indies public at least a fake apology or something. And I stand by that, right? You can't, whatever's gone on, because obviously Cricket West Indies haven't said anything. You can't, and we can only go by what his exchange between him and his wife. You can't expect to suddenly just say, well, I'm available now, pick man, and you ain't addressed what happened at the World Cup. You ain't even pretended to apologize to the public and say, you know what, people, I don't care what Shimron believes. The West Indian public, and I mean even some of his supporters in Guyana, that he went too far with that one. Yeah. He went too far with that one. And he needs to do something public that just assures people, you know what, man still loves West Indies cricket. Something public does not mean your wife messaging some mad message on Instagram, knowing the whole world can see it. Come on, man. Come. And more fool Shimron. Actually, now he started me. See, now I'm getting hot. More fool Shimron. Because as a professional cricketer, surely you're supposed to say to your wife, I beg you don't say nothing. I beg you don't. No, don't do that. I beg you don't put my name in no public message for a passer to start happening and people start chatting my name. What's going on, Santokie? What's going on? The man's not serious.
It doesn't make any sense because, like you said, Mash, there obviously would have been questions about Hetmyer, but I think that could have been dismissed easily. But the fact this has all come out means it's naturally going to lead to more questions and then more spotlight on Hetmyer. But I just think, him missing the plane is one thing. If his rationale had been proven right in terms of why he missed the Berbice Bridge, if there was miscommunication. But the fact that the report that came out afterwards about the T20 World Cup performance essentially broke down that there were fabrications in his account because the Berbice Bridge closed at 11:30 or something, and his flight was at 12:30. So he would have had to have crossed the bridge earlier than 11:30 when the bridge was available, something along those lines. So the fact that his account was discredited in the official report that was written about the World Cup, and then nothing further has been said, like you said, Mash, I just think there needs to be some sort of statement, apology, or something from Hetmyer at least before we can sort of move on. Because what message are you sending to players and stakeholders if you're saying a man who just chose to miss the World Cup for no apparent reason, no valid reason has ever been given, as the Berbice Bridge has been discredited in the report, if we just throw him back into the West Indies side, what message is that sending long term? And that's probably why they haven't picked him for the side, despite him supposedly declaring his availability.
Yeah, I'm all for listening to the players, and I do still think Cricket West Indies have to sit with Shimron, and maybe if his wife is telling the truth and Shimron and Jimmy spoke, cool. And maybe that's the start of the process of trying to heal these divides and divisions and so on and so forth. But you can't, and then we can only go what's in the public domain. And Shimron can't get vexed with me or you and say, how dare you discuss my business? Because who told his wife to put that stuff in the public domain, if not him? It's dumbness, right? So we can only go by what's in the public domain, because Cricket West Indies ain't put nothing in the public domain. They ain't put nothing out there. Yeah. So he has to get control of what's gone out into the public domain, right? So going off the back of what's out there for people to consume and for people to read, he cannot assume that just because he's had one conversation with Jimmy Adams or whoever and said, you know what, I'm available now, that's enough. That can't just be enough. Oh, I'm ready now. Man's ready to commit. We've had our convo. Bring man back in. Come on, man. That in itself shows me he doesn't understand the gravity of what went on with that flipping plane thing and bridge thing and whatever. That shows me that him or his wife, whoever, has not read the room in so much as how outlandish that whole thing looked. So, boy, and I'm all for bringing Shimron Hetmyer back into the fold, but he cannot expect that one convo and one recommitment to West Indies, that's just enough, and you're just back in straight away, and so on and so forth. And just to kind of finish on your point, Santokie, and also not when the West Indies batting lineup just performed in South Africa. Yeah. In both T20s and ODIs. You can't then expect to just force your way straight back into the team. That don't make no sense.
Yeah, I think if Hetmyer was a strike bowler, for instance, a world-class strike bowler, West Indies might have thought about throwing him in. But I just think there was the fact that there's no desperate need to add more middle-order batters to the side. I mean, Hetmyer, he's a world-class player, we know that. But I think the batting lineup is settled, so it kind of decreases his value in terms of having to rush him back into the side suddenly. But also, I think, Mash, on the topic of missing players, a lot of fans after Hetmyer, it's been Evan Lewis. Where is Evan Lewis? Now, I think this is just a repeat of what happened in the T20 World Cup, where we threw Lewis into the side and he didn't perform as expected. I think ODIs, he had similar to Hetmyer. He hasn't played since July 2021. I just don't see, especially with King and Mayer settled at the top of the order, I just don't see what benefit. As we know, Evan Lewis is a world-class player, but I just don't feel at this point in time and the circumstances around him, I just don't feel he would be. He would necessarily do well in these ODI World Cup qualifiers. I think he would struggle because it's hard for any player to not play ODI cricket or a format for 2 years at international level and suddenly, when the pressure is on, manage to perform. So Evan Lewis is another one. I just don't think there's any real need. The other two players, Dre Ross and Sunil Narine, inevitably came up. Listen, Narine hasn't played an ODI since 2016. I'm genuinely confident in saying I don't think we'll ever see him play an ODI for West Indies again. And similar to Dre Russ, you know what? Credit to Dre Russ because he gave his all, what he could in that 2019 World Cup in 50 overs. And you could see he was a broken man at the end of that tournament. He's never going to play ODIs again after that tournament. So it was never in contention, I don't think, from my perspective, to see the Ryan or Dre Russ in there. We could see Evan Lewis come back to the ODI fold in the future. But for me, at this point in time, it's not the right move to try and rush him back in.
Listen, let's bring this to a close, but just answer this one question, Santokie. I agree. We can't ever there's no conversation to be had with regards to Narayan and Russell in ODIs. But remember, we do have a home T20 World Cup in 2024. Are you ruling them out of that though?
No.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I think that's basically now or never. If they don't play at the World Cup next year, we'll never see them in West Indies colours again. They'll both be 35, 36 by next year. It's a home World Cup. I mean, what else? What other motivational factors could you need? So, as you said earlier in the show, Mash, Sammy's people skills, his motivational factors, his inspirational qualities could be enough to draw them back for the West Indies side in the T20 World Cup. And I would be glad to see them because I do think they are still world class and would benefit West Indies massively. But we'll have to wait and see. I think for now, Mash, all focuses on the ODIs and
listen
right. in just over 6 weeks' time, we'll be doing a show. We might be having a breakdown after West Indies get wrapped up by Scotland, Zimbabwe.
Do you know what? The other day, I actually had not a nightmare in terms of sleep nightmare, but the thought crossed my mind. I remember I was sitting down, I was doing some work for school or whatever, and the thought crossed my mind. I just, you know, when you have one of them random thoughts and you're looking into the future, and I could see myself and you doing a video after Nepal had beaten us and Monty Desai was doing laps around the pitch just celebrating. And I could hear myself going, this is the lowest it's ever going to get for West Indies cricket. So listen, people, I say that to say, listen, we got a lot of cricket coming up. And also, actually, we didn't even reference it, but we are expecting a women's head coach to be announced sometime in the near future as well. Santokie told me the other day that he reckons Shiv may well end up getting that, but we'll see, right? So lots coming up, people. Obviously, the women's Super 50 is going on at the moment. That's followed by the women's T20 Blaze as well. Barbados are licking everybody down at the moment in the Super 50. You've got the men's A squad A-team tour of Bangladesh. The first match starts on Tuesday. You've got the West Indies tour of UAE, ODI tour of UAE, and then of course we've got the ODI World Cup qualifiers. So plenty of cricket on the horizon, people. We'll be covering it all on Caribbean Cricket Podcast. Stay locked in as ever. Santokie, last words to you.
Yeah, thanks for everyone for joining us. Always an eventful discussion, especially on a Saturday night. And as Mash said, a lot of cricket coming up. We're looking forward to it. We'll be covering it, trying to get as many reaction shows, live shows as the cricket unfolds. So stay tuned, guys. Thanks for locking in. Hope everyone has a good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Take care, people. Bye.
Peace.
We rule the cricket world. Now the rule seems coming.
Welcome to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things West Indies cricket. By the fans, for the fans.